now, our feature program.
I call Roy the Stabilizer all the time. Roy stabilized, fractious attitudes, especially amongst me and Jackie and whomever else was involved, young players.
Well, my dad was a real settling influence. My dad was a real centering kind of influence. He had that Zen-like quality. He didn't feel powerless. He felt that the real power was in living your life with a kind of truth and a kind of commitment that allowed you to transcend that negative environment.
He really loved to play the game of baseball. To him, it was more than a game. It was an opportunity to be a little boy again. Just put the uniform, just play games and have fun.
I learned how to appreciate him a great deal once I learned his life and how he was and what made him tick. I learned about him a great deal, and he became very special to me. I think Roy's philosophy and spirit came out in other ways once he was put in that chair.
When I was a kid playing ball here at the parade grounds in Brooklyn, all the catchers were white. We were told blacks weren't smart enough to call pitches. Roy Campanella shattered that myth, winning the Most Valuable Player award 3 times in 6 years. In 1953, Ty Cobb, no less, said Campanella would be the most remembered player of this century. 5 years later, Campy's car skidded on a small sheet of ice in the pre-dawn hours and crashed into a telephone pole. Roy would spend the next 34 years in a wheelchair. When you're coming from a long ways off, he recalled, the days and nights become one drawn-out piece of eternity.
This is your life. Our principal subject for tonight, and there he is coming down the hall in a wheelchair with his faithful attendant, Leroy Newsom, one of the all-time greats of baseball, catcher for the Brooklyn, now Los Angeles Dodgers, Roy Campanella. Hello, Roy. Oh, buddy boy, it's a thrill to see you, I'll tell you. Yes, Roy Campanella tonight, this is your life, and here to share it with you are your mom and dad, your brother Larry, and your sisters Gladys, right over here, and your niece Judith. Go ahead, Leroy.
It taught me quite a bit playing baseball because living in this wheelchair for 30-some years, if I didn't have that background, I don't think I could have made it. You have to have a lot of little boy in you to play. You've never seen a group of men act like little boys after somebody hits a home run. But that's the little boy coming out. And you have to have that little boy in you to play.
Roy Campanella, the youngest of 4 children, grew up in a section of North Philadelphia called Nicetown, a neighborhood of mostly Polish, Italian, and Irish-American families. Nicetown was where Campanella first learned to hit a baseball and first experienced the pain of discrimination, something he would have to endure years later when he became an involuntary pioneer in baseball's noble experiment.
All the schools I went to were interracial. Coming home from junior high, one day a boy called me a half-breed, and I hit him. But I started thinking then, and I ran home and asked my mother. And my mother told me the story. But I never realized my father was Italian.
He used to go and watch Philly games from the rooftops of a building so they could avoid, pain.
That's when I started to realize, it was the Philadelphia Athletics and the Philadelphia Phillies. And there was no black players.
One afternoon in 1937, a local all-black semi-pro baseball team, the Bacharach Giants, spotted a husky 15-year-old kid hitting the cover off a baseball. The next day, Bacharach manager and catcher Tom Dixon arrived at the Campanella household with contract in hand. Dixon was a charming man whose talents worked best at dodging hotel bills. A protective mother presented a different sort of challenge.
My mother stood up and said, he can't play baseball on Sunday. Coming from Philadelphia, an old Quaker state, Pennsylvania, nothing could be done on Sunday.
Mrs. Campanella was assured her son would be protected from the three evils of barnstorming baseball: gambling, prostitution, and liquor. Out of his $10 a week salary, Roy would keep only enough for living expenses. The rest would be sent home. The deal was sealed. This future Hall of Famer could now proudly call himself the third-string catcher for the barnstorming Bacharach Giants. The team traveled town to town in two white Cadillac sedans. The first road trip with their new catcher was to the big town, New York City.
That was the first time I had ever left home. And going from Philadelphia to New York was quite an experience. We had to go through the Holland Tunnel to get into New York. So the fellows asked me, did I have a gas mask? I said, for what? So you're going through the tunnel, you have to put this on. So I tied a handkerchief around my nose and mouth.
The Bacharach Giants, like most Negro teams visiting New York, stayed at the Woodside Hotel in Harlem, the Taj Mahal of African-American culture during the 1930s.
You heard the song Jumping at the Woodside, Count Basie. And Baltimore would be in town. Maybe the Kansas City Monarchs were playing the Baltimore Eli Giants. And maybe the Memphis Red Sox was playing the New York Black Yankees. And all of these people are in town over this weekend. And man, after the ball games, everybody would come to the Woodside.
Tom Dixon told his new catcher, "You ain't nobody, kid, until you've made it in the big town." The boy who stood awestruck in the lobby of the Woodside would not only capture the big town, but he would capture it as a black man in a big league uniform. Campanella's talents were soon noticed by the Negro League's most majestic team, the Eli Giants, and their behemoth catcher, Biz Mackey. Whenever the Blue Bus rolled into town, it was a circus, a parade, and the 4th of July all rolled into one.
He saw this youngster with all this talent, and I said, "Listen, let me tell you this." I said, "I heard you're the hottest young thing and newest thing in the league." I said, "But when you come here in Newark," I said, I want you to know that I'm the boss, And he said, "Well, if that's what you want, that's the way it is." So we shook hands and we became friends, and fast and close friends for the rest of our lives.
This is a chesty little sucker, see, and could play. So everybody kind of, you know what I mean, we kind of spoiled the boy, really, because everybody liked him, because he could play. Biz Mackey was like a father figure to him and a mentor, because Biz Mackey was one of the best minds in baseball. Knew catching inside and out, and Biz told him he could throw it just as hard from right there, see, and more accurate.
He taught Campy how to get along with people, how to get along with other ball players, what to do on and off the field. Don't get involved in the politics, you know. Just go out and play, and then everything else will take care of itself.
In the days before the superhighways, these barnstormers traveled at the top speed of 45 miles an hour.
We learned how to sleep on the bus. In fact, we learned how to sleep on the bus better than we did in our own beds.
Team meals were usually taken on the road and often consisted of soda pop, hot dogs, and if lucky, an occasional sardine. The high sodium diet and the long hours sitting on a cramped bus often caused the players' ankles to swell to twice their normal size. And sometimes the playing surface ranged from the ridiculous to the surreal.
Well, in those days, you could play at ballparks that didn't have lights, and they would install portable lights. There was wires running all over the outfield, and if you happened to step on one of those wires with the metal spikes, you would see sparks.
In 1939, Campanella quit high school to become a full-time professional ball player. His first winter in the tropics, he set a Puerto Rican League home run record previously held by a player known as the Black Babe Ruth, the legendary Josh Gibson. Campanella was 17. After the Dodgers' 1941 setback, team president Larry MacPhail sank deeper into the bottle. He was less predictable than ever. That year, after an all-nighter, he traded the entire Dodger team to the St. Louis Cardinals. But Cardinal owner Sam Braden was unable to raise the $3 million needed before the Brooklyn stockholders got wind of the plan.
Larry MacPhail was the sort of person you wanted to follow around because you never knew what was going to happen. The likelihood was that if you spent a day with him, sometime during the day, he would get involved with a fist fight with somebody. He was just a remarkable character and a great baseball man, of course. But his emotions would run away with him. I mean, he was fairly unstable.
In 1942, Pete Reeser slammed into the center field wall. MacPhail insisted Reeser stay in the lineup despite blurred vision. The Brooklyn stockholders, already incensed by MacPhail's lavish spending, suspected that his sanity was going. MacPhail was replaced by Branch Rickey, a former Major League catcher and general manager for the Cardinals.
My grandfather had an awful lot of success in St. Louis with the Gas House Gang clubs of the late 20s and 30s and early 40s. So his entire focus on going over to the Dodgers was to acquire a large base of talent. So the thrust was on, and this is during the war years, of course, the thrust was on developing the farm system, getting a large base of talent, and out of that molding the kind of organization that would give him repeated success throughout the 50s.
In the early 1940s, organized baseball was taking a hard pounding from various groups who opposed the color barrier. The Communist Party and the black press would take the most ambitious steps toward integrating the American pastime.
The guy who was the sports editor of the Daily Worker said that there were two things about his life. One, I'm a communist, and two, I'm a Dodger fan. So his efforts were really always pointed towards the Brooklyn Dodgers as the team to break in terms of integration.
Reacting to pressure from Lester Rodney of the Daily Worker, the Pirates offered Campanella a clandestine tryout. There were so many buts and stipulations that Campy ignored the tryout offer.
We were playing a major league all-star team, and I was on a Negro team, all-star team. Charlie Dressen was the manager of the Major League All-Stars. And one inning, he asked me when I was warming up the pitcher, he wanted to talk to me after the game. And I told him, all right. That was in Newark, New Jersey. And that was the first inkling or anybody to talk to me from the major leagues.
In the fall of '45, Campanella departed for Brooklyn. He thought he was going to be asked to play for the Brooklyn Brown Dodgers, a new Negro League team that Rickey was trying to form. At the Dodgers' office at 215 Montague Street, Roy was greeted by a man with wild sagebrush eyebrows. Food stains dappled the front of his rumpled suit. His booming voice and sweeping gestures gave him the appearance of a roadshow Shakespearean actor. If you followed the soggy, half-smoked cigar in his left hand, he became hypnotic. For the next 3 hours, Campy sat at the throne of the man they called the Mahatma.
My grandfather had a wonderful sense of theater. There's no doubt about it. And here's this young kid coming in with baseball in his heart, baseball in his pocket, thinking nothing but baseball. And here he meets this 60-year-old, and they're talking religion and sociology. And my grandfather's probably got him as confused as he ever was in his life. And yet I think there was an instant chemistry between them, an instant liking between the two individuals.
Branch Rickey had hired former Negro League great Oscar Charleston, who could easily slip in and out of Negro League dugouts and clubhouses without arousing suspicion. Charleston's mission? File reports about a player's abilities and shortcomings. He kept notes on what a player ate, drank, and with whom he kept company.
They had a report on me with a book about 3 inches thick. I didn't realize that they were watching me.
Campy left the Dodgers office befuddled. As he took the A train back to Harlem, he played the old man's parting words over in his head. Make sure you keep in touch, my boy.
There was a Brooklyn Brown Dodgers, and I had no idea. He was talking about the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Back at the Woodside Hotel, Campanella, along with several other Negro League players, prepared to depart for winter ball. Among the players waiting to shove off was a young, fiery first-year shortstop with the Monarchs named Robinson. The night before their departure, the two men got into a friendly game of gin rummy.
And Jackie saw that he could trust my father to keep a secret. And he told him, you know, on the eve of the announcement, that he, in fact, had signed to play for the Montreal Royals. And that's when my father realized, oh, you know, Rickey was actually talking about the Brooklyn Dodgers.
The next day, the country awoke to a wire photo of Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey side by side at the signing. The country was amazed. The news touched every African-American community across the land. The barrier was coming down. Early in 1946, Jackie Robinson reported to the Dodgers' AAA franchise in Montreal. He was joined by pitcher John Wright, the first African-American pitcher to sign an organized baseball contract. Meanwhile, Campanella was forced to spend an agonizing winter thinking about his meeting with Rickey and wondering whether he'd ever get a second chance. On March 1st, 1946, word came to Caracas. This time, there were no vague words at 215 Montague Street.
But the relationship he established with my father was a special one because my dad being a catcher and Rickey having been a catcher, the two were able to talk about the game from a strategic point of view. And one of Rickey's concerns was the relationship my dad would establish with primarily the white pitchers.
As expected, Rickey had faced an onslaught of opposition when he signed Robinson and Wright. The signing of Campanella and 18-year-old Don Newcomb aggravated the controversy. Rickey first contacted the Dodgers Class D club in Danville, Illinois.
We were made to believe that Danville didn't want us because we were black. And Mr. Rickey called Buzzy Bavasi, as Buzzy relates.
I could care what color they were. But with the Campanella and Newcomb, I knew that we had a chance to win, which we did. And I like to think I was smart, but I wasn't really. I just decided, let my heart judge talent rather than my head.
Down south in spring training, a local sheriff ushered Jackie Robinson and John Wright off the field in DeLand, Florida, where strict Jim Crow laws forbade blacks and whites from mixing in public places. Life in New Hampshire did not go without incident for organized baseball's first black battery, Don Newcomb and Roy Campanella.
As long as those people did not put their hands on us physically, we knew that we couldn't control ourselves. It was pretty hard on the field sometimes. I remember a catcher throwing dirt in Roy's face one night. He was a batter at that time, and Roy was catching. He was down behind him, and he threw some dirt in Roy's face. And even at that time, in 1946, Roy stood up, as a man will stand up, and said, "If you ever do that again, I'm going to break your arm for you."
Since the Nashua ballpark was without a fence, a local farmer felt confident enough to offer 100 baby chicks for every home run a home team player hit. Campanella sent his chicks home to his father. By the end of the season, Roy's family had started a poultry farm on the outskirts of Nicetown.
So fortunately, and very lucky for me, Mr. Rickey sent them to me in Nashua. That was in 1946. And they weren't too welcome there at first, but by the end of the season, both of them could have been elected mayor of the town.
Campanella was touted as the best prospect in the minors. April 1st, 1948, Roy Campanella received Brooklyn Dodger jersey number 39. But the April Fool's joke appeared to be on Campy. Branch Rickey presented an unusual proposal.
He told me he didn't want me to make the Dodgers. He wanted to send me to St. Paul to be the first black player to play in the American Association so that in the future they could farm black players to St. Paul.
His dream was becoming a big leaguer. And this dream is being interrupted by a seemingly unnecessary departure to play another season in the minor leagues.
As an added incentive to play in the minors, Rickey increased his catcher's salary an additional $1,500 over the major league minimum. In St. Paul, Campy knocked in 39 runs in his first 35 games. Meanwhile, Brooklyn continued to struggle. By late June, the Dodgers were in last place, and Campy came back to Brooklyn, where he belonged. With the addition of Campanella and Robinson, the Dodger arsenal was stronger than ever. In Campy's first 12 at-bats, he clubbed 9 hits. The Brooklyn Dodgers won 16 of 19 games with Campanella in the lineup. A new Brooklyn battle cry sounded, "As Campy goes, so go the Dodgers." As the 50s approached, Jackie Robinson became more outspoken. Campanella's affability was a welcome contrast to Robinson's strident personality.
Campy meant a roommate and someone to share the tears, the sorrows, because Jackie was there by himself, and they were vicious. I came in the league 5 years later, and they were sending me letters. Why don't you coons go back to Africa? Well, here's another baboon. You're dumb like your nigger mother. And like Philadelphia was worse than anybody. Now, when Campy came there, he had someone to sit down and says, "Did you see those ignorant people today?"
I roomed with Jackie, and we discussed this every night when we would go to bed. Jackie got in a few arguments and things, and I tried to tell Jackie, just cool it. All we were out here to do is prove that we could play baseball.
Campy was just a fun-loving guy. Everybody in the clubhouse, the blacks and the whites, loved him. He got along with everybody. Jackie got along with people too, but Campy seemed to be more one of the boys more so than Jackie.
A moody South Carolinian named Hugh Casey was the first to test Campanella's temperament.
He was a hard drinker. I mean, a hard drinker. He took a shotgun, put it in his mouth, pulled the trigger. That was the type of guy he was. He was very serious, but he's very tough. I was playing a game against him. We were close friends, but he was on the other team. And I got a base hit and kind of laughed when I went down to first base on a little hit and run play. The next time up, he hit me right in the back with the ball.
Now, my dad had an encyclopedic knowledge of hitters, their strengths and weaknesses. He didn't just call a sign on a whim. I mean, he was very serious about the signs he called. And UKC ignored it.
I can remember one time when Campy had called for a curveball. And Hugh said, I'll get to him. I'll toss him up, you know. Threw him a fastball, and the guy hit it in the upper deck. I said, Hugh, maybe we better listen to Campanella when he wants us a curveball.
The guy hits a game-winning home run, and on the way back to the dugout, as I recall, my dad said to UKC, you should never shake off one of my signs. I'm smarter than you, and you ought to know I'm smarter than you. I'm smarter than most of the pitchers on this team. There's a reason I'm calling for those signs, and you ought to throw it.
I had no problems catching UKC. I would just give him a sign, and if he didn't want to throw it, you throw what you wanted then.
When Campanella came up in 1948 to catch, he immediately, I think, he set himself in charge of things, and he'd just talk to you, and he'd say, now you just do what old Campy tells you, and I guarantee you we'll get by, and it would be that way.
Injuries caused Campanella to fall shy of the team's 20-year-old single-season home run mark in 1950. The Dodgers also fell shy of the pennant that season. That winter, Campanella's bad luck escalated. A faulty hot water heater exploded in his face. Both corneas were blistered. After his eyesight was restored, Campy called this the most frightening moment in his life. But this was a fraction of the devastation and terror awaiting him on another winter morning in the near future. In 1951, the relationship between Robinson and Campanella had begun to strain.
To Roy Campanella, the 1951 Annual Sports Achievement Award for his outstanding contribution to the Brooklyn Ball Club and for winning the Most Valuable Player Award in the National League, Roy Campanella.
Jack would get impatient with Campy because he wanted him to speak up more. Campy would get impatient with Jack because he thought he spoke up too much. And that is a fact of life, and we see that in contemporary society where people take different approaches to an end. And sometimes the more vocal ones are the ones who become the target of bad press because obviously people would prefer the more passive approach.
The decade of the quiet generation opened with agony and ambition. While the Korean War raged, cars rolled off the American assembly lines, 60 million of them by decade's end. Beginning in 1950 and continuing for the next 30 years, 18 of the nation's top 25 cities would lose 60 million dwellers to the suburbs. The president of the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority in New York City, Robert Moses, helped pave the way to William Levitt's dream of utopia. From 1945 to 1957, the national birth rate climbed to nearly 2 million a year. One survey revealed generosity, friendliness, and progressivism as America's most distinguished characteristics. The faults? Egoism, greed, and shallowness. Racism was not on that list. In his 1953 novel, The Invisible Man, African-American author Ralph Ellison cried out, "I am an invisible man simply because you refuse to see me."
Robinson's arrival was not so much a denial of prejudice, but a consciousness raising about what was an unconscious prejudice. It made them face what they had taken for granted, that it's all right that these black people be invisible. Jackie Robinson made it impossible for them to be invisible any longer.
President Eisenhower addresses the Freedom Fulfillment Conference of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in Washington.
Wherever the federal authority clearly extends, I will do the utmost that lies within my power to bring into living reality this expression of equality among all men who are citizens of this country.
And it's only a short time after Jackie was in the majors, in the Dodgers, that the Supreme Court came down with a 1954 Brung decision. I mean, this is not accidental. All this happened in that same period. Something was happening in America, and Jackie Robinson was the guy that became the standard bearer for that changing American era.
However, in 1953, Jim Crow had yet to die its second. A year before Brown versus the Board of Education, Jackie Robinson took his own bold stance against segregation.
St. Louis was the last city that would not permit the Negro players to stay in the hotel. We stayed in the Chase Hotel in St. Louis at the time.
Robinson integrated the Chase, while Campanella elected to stay at the Adams.
And on the bus, I could hear Jack, because they didn't try to hide anything from me. Jackie didn't. And Jackie says, "I'm going to the Chase." And Campy says, "Hey, Jackie, we'll get in the hotel soon enough." I said, "Let's not cause any trouble." He said, "You do whatever you want to, but I am going." And he did. But he kind of got a little upset with Camp and then called him, that he's an Uncle Tom.
Jackie wanted Roy to carry the torch like he did and to be the same crusader was. But Roy was not that type. Roy was the type that, again, just happy to be here. I'm in the big leagues. I've been playing in the Negro Leagues since I was 15 years old. I had 10 years of that bus ride. Now I'm going first class wherever I go.
I don't really think they had different values, though. He didn't feel comfortable challenging individuals to totally reorient and change their worldview through one conversation. And Jackie felt comfortable doing that. I'll give you an example. The Dodgers during spring training were playing an exhibition game in Miami. And when they played in Miami, the African-American ball players would stay at a hotel in the black section of Miami. This was in the segregated early 50s. And they had played the game, and my dad and Jackie were getting ready to take a cab back to the hotel. And a cab drove by, and they hailed it. And the white cab driver wasn't going to drive them to the black section of Miami. In fact, he wasn't going to drive them at all. Jackie got involved in an argument with the man. And my father finally stopped him with, "Hey, Jackie, it's not going to change this guy's mind." But my father also believed that life itself was good, and that if you promoted the good, that you could, in a sense, minimize the bad. And that his best antidote for the oppression was to live well, that living well was the best revenge.
No, I never felt like I was a crusader. I wanted to play baseball and prove that a black player could play in the white leagues.
In 1952, Campy's home run totals dwindled while his waistline grew. His teammates gave him a new nickname, Puccinella. In the World Series that year, Roy's contribution was a meager .214 and 1 run batted in. Brooklyn lost to the Yankees in 7. That winter, the Dodgers celebrated the triple signing of Reese, Robinson, and Campanella at the Hotel Lexington in Manhattan. Campy was the only one of the three not to get a raise. That spring, Campanella reported in at a sleek 205, the best shape of his career. Walter O'Malley suggested team captain Pee Wee Reese shave Campanella's winter mustache as a publicity stunt. In 1953, Roy Campanella compiled the best statistics of any catcher in history. The 53 Dodgers won a team record 105 games under manager Charlie Dressen. Given the superstitious nature of ball players, the shaving party would become a ritual.
I think it was the best baseball team I had ever seen, and maybe the best team ever. Every star player was at his peak during that year. Campanella was the most valuable player, was a great catcher, a great receiver, in control of the game, knew the pitches, understood the personality of every pitcher on that team.
But Casey and his Yankees were waiting. Brooklyn dropped the first 2 games of the '53 World Series. Roy and his family were scheduled to be on Edward R. Murrow's Person to Person after Game 3. Publicist Irving Rudd pleaded that Roy give Murrow something to talk about. Campy responded with an 8th-inning home run, giving Brooklyn a 3-2 victory. He also orchestrated Carl Erskine's 14-strikeout performance, a World Series record.
May we come in, Roy? Good evening, Roy.
Hi, Ed. How are you?
Well, if I sound a little bit hoarse, Roy, it's because of what you did in the 8th inning today. There was something of an explosion around our office.
Well, sure glad you're a little hoarse then.
Roy, I must put the first question first. How's the hand?
Well, it's still a little sore, but I hope it'll be a little better tomorrow.
You're going to be able to play tomorrow?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Roy, I wonder if we could meet your family.
Well, yes, Ed, it's a pleasure. This is Roy. Roy's 5. This is David. David's 10, and this is Tony. And then little Ruthie's upstairs asleep, and Joyce and Bevy, they're in school right now.
Well, now, Roy, we were talking about your trophies. Of which are you the most proud?
Oh, this is my prize of my baseball career.
What is it, Roy? I can't read it from here.
This is the most valuable player of 1951. It was given to me, and I treasure it from the bottom of my heart.
You don't think that's likely to be the last one of those you'll get, do you?
Well, I have this one anyhow.
That same night, Roy was officially named the National League's most valuable player, his 2nd MVP award in only 5 seasons. Only 3 other players in the history of the game had won the award more often than Campanella. But the Yankees, as usual, destroyed the perfect season. Perfection arrived at 3:45 p.m. on October 4th, 1955. Brooklyn finally had its World Championship flag, its first and last. In Brooklyn, October 4th, 1955, was compared to VE Day. On hand to celebrate were the famous and the yet-to-be, including 21-year-old Larry Zeigert from the Bensonhurst section.
I was working at Silver Shield, which was a debt consolidation service, and I was in my office on Church Avenue, and I can still hear the ground ball to Reese, and picks it up and fires to Hodges, and Howard was out by 2-3 steps, and pandemonium broke out. I ran to the street. Everybody else ran to the street. We didn't know what to do. We were just yelling up and down. It was so unbelievable that we had actually won a World Series.
The pain that these people went through, along with us, to win the World Series. Willard Mullins' caricature of the bum on the front page of the New York Daily News says, "Who's a bum?" That spoke volumes to what that meant to the city of Brooklyn in terms of respectability, of recognition, of having arrived.
On hand to celebrate the Dodger victory was South African writer Alan Paton, author of Cry the Beloved Country. 50s crooner Tony Martin was also there. So was Los Angeles mayor and devoted Dodger fan Norris Polson. 2 months prior to the Dodger victory, Walter O'Malley sent a letter to Robert Moses, New York's power broker. O'Malley wanted the city to provide him land on which he would build a domed stadium. One intuitive writer, Roscoe McGowan of the New York Times, speculated, unless O'Malley succeeds in getting the site he wants, there will be no stadium and no Dodgers in Brooklyn. As Johnny Potter has accepted the Most Valuable Player award for the 55 series, Roy Campanella notched his third league MVP award. That year, Roy became only the third catcher in history to hit 200 lifetime home runs. In just 8 years, Campy had gone from a $185 a month rookie to a $360 a game superstar. Roy moved his family to Long Island and built a dream home on the former estate of J.P. Morgan. His 206-foot attic held 13 exotic fish tanks and an elaborate train set. He also bought a $40,000 yacht, which he named for his daughter, the Princess. At age 36, Campy had captured the big town. Now retired, Jackie Robinson told reporters in 1957 that Campanella was washed up, would not catch 100 games that season. The Dodger catcher vowed to prove his old teammate wrong. 1957 marked Campanella's 9th consecutive season of catching 100 or more games, a major league record. But Campy's achievement went unheralded. Rumors of the Dodgers leaving Brooklyn had grown. In the same Philadelphia ballpark, where he used to watch the Phillies from neighboring rooftops, the boy from Nicetown played his final major league game. Roy would later recall, "How does a man know when he is taking his last steps of his life?"
I thought I'd see my dad play a lot of games. I know he was very enthusiastic about moving out to Los Angeles and playing there. He thought that the left field line was so short, in the Coliseum, that he'd be able to hit, more home runs than normal.
That fall, Campy took one last trip on the Princess, a glorious week of fishing on the Atlantic. He sailed with Carl Erskine.
I remember the day taking some home movies and going out with Roy. I just love those pictures because this robust man at his peak seemed to just come together that day. I mean, when I look at those pictures, I just see Roy as I remember him in this robust, physical, healthy, upbeat peak of his career and of his physical life. He was so grateful for his chance to be in the major leagues. MVP 3 times, Hall of Fame is a cinch. He probably knew it at that time.
January 28, 1958. Campy worked late at the liquor store he owned in Harlem. At 2 a.m., he started his drive home.
It was a cold January night, and a thin sheet of ice covered a winding road approaching the small private island that we lived on. And his car swerved. He struck a telephone pole head on and was, thrust forward into the windshield and steering wheel column and dashboard.
The 220-pound Campanella lay wedged beneath the dashboard in a fetal position until daybreak. Only the smell of gas would revive him. He tried to turn off the ignition, but could not move his arms. He waited for someone to find him, or for the fire that would burn him alive.
When he attempted to reach for the key, he couldn't. That's when his life changed.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me.
As the sun came up over Long Island, he repeated the 23rd Psalm. At the Rusk Institute in Manhattan, Several layers of muscle were removed from his neck. 2 holes bored into his skull. Crutchfield tongs kept his head steady. Campy said he no longer felt a part of the world.
I was totally unprepared to see my father in the condition that I saw him in, lying prone, looking face down in a kind of Dr. Frankenstein contraption, which was obviously helpful to him because he had severed his spinal cord in the automobile accident. And it was a traumatic emotional moment that kind of scars you.
I remember the first time I went to see him in the hospital. It was pathetic, because here's this great, man's man kind of a person helpless. And that's not the role you ever wanted to see Campanella in.
He had a breathing machine, and the only way he could respond to you was by blinking his eyes, yes or no. Close them, yes, and keep them open, no. And I stood down at the foot of his bed, and I was reading some things to him out of the newspaper somebody had written about him. And I said to him, Rumi, I really, and I call him Rumi, I said, Rumi, I really know how you feel. And then something hit me, man, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know how he feels. And I said, Rumi, I'm sorry, I don't know how you feel.
Now at New York's Institute of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, Roy Campanella holds his first open press conference and shows the great progress he has made in his fight against near-total paralysis.
Roy, you're looking pretty good. How do you feel?
Well, I feel as good as I look. I think I've come a long ways. Sure, it's true I can't walk, but I think I can make it without doing that even.
I think all of us try to find and make sense out of the confusion of life. And when Roy Campanella suffered his accident, all of us were crushed. And then after the pain seemed to go away, we tried to reason with it. We tried to figure out why would this could have happened. And I think many of us who are very close, who saw Roy day in and day out here, realized that perhaps that was his role in life. First as a player, to be a role model, to be a so-called hero, a hero to kids. And then later on in his life, he was given another role, and that was to sit in his wheelchair.
What happens, I believe, when people have disabilities, like a Stevie Wonder, for example, he becomes a great musician out in other ways. And I think Roy's philosophy and spirit came out in other ways once he was put in that chair.
He made a great impact as a player. I'm not sure in the long run he didn't make a bigger impact and to more people the way he handled his life after he seemed to have lost everything. He would not let this terrific accident to paralyze him from the neck down, would not let that taint his life.
May 7, 1959, 93,000 people crammed into the Los Angeles Coliseum to honor the Dodger great.
Perhaps the most beautiful and dramatic moment in the history of sports. Let there be a prayer for every life. And wherever you are, maybe you, in silent tribute to Campanella, can also say a prayer for his well-being.
It was the largest crowd ever to watch a baseball game. Pee Wee Reese pushed his former teammate out onto the field as the crowd held up candles.
It was also this touching tribute of everyone lighting a match. And it was almost magical. Now, that night also represents, at another level, and without taking any of the special quality of adoration and tribute away from that night, because our family stayed at the Sheraton Hotel, and we were Jim Crowed. We weren't even allowed to swim in the hotel pool. For me, as a kid who loved to swim and who really couldn't understand at that moment in my youth how my dad could be honored so widely and so profoundly, and within the same breath almost, our family could be told, you're not good enough to swim in the pool with our white guests.
He didn't care that much about life at the beginning, after the accident. He would try to, demonstrate, what a catcher should do, or how a ball player should have, reacted. And, you know, and he just couldn't do that.
He went through a drinking problem, and I know because I mixed the drinks for him. And he went through periods of talking about baseball and crying, and of dialoguing, but there was always this faith and commitment to himself, to his family, to us, and a strong will to beat it.
And when O'Malley brought him out to California and gave him some responsibility, you know, going down to spring training, so he couldn't show the catchers what to do, but he could tell them, and he could teach from that chair, and I think that helped to prolong his life as long as it did.
He was in many respects a brother, a father, a best friend, and a great inspiration to everyone in the organization.
There was domestic discord between my mother, Ruth, and my dad before the accident. I think she felt great sympathy with the accident and very badly about it, and was overwhelmed.
His wife, Ruth, who was really a charming lady and very quiet, and it surprised me that when Campy told me what she had said, and since she ended up leaving Campy, and said, well, you're just a half a man.
Campanella moved out of the home on Glen Cove and into a small apartment. Alone, impaired, Roy would meet a former nurse named Roxanne.
He was really, really down because he felt he was all alone in the world and had nobody. He left his home and his family, and I just let him talk, and as he talked, I could see a lot of really good things in this man. He needed somebody, and I guess that drew me closer to him. But seeing all the problems he was going through, not allowed to see his children, in which he needed his children, his family, you know. And from that on, when he asked me to marry him, I accepted it.
At nightfall, when my attendant comes to put me to bed, I always fear that if he didn't come back the next morning, I couldn't get out of the bed. But my wife is always there and helps me quite a bit. The consolation that I know she's there beside me.
If he'd been alone, he wouldn't be alive today, I can say that. I'm saying it with sincerity, because anyone that's paralyzed need somebody. If you don't have anybody, you deteriorate. Put this on. I have to lock it. And it helps him to breathe, helps strengthen his lungs. Without this at night, he wouldn't be able to make it.
Boy, that air, that's a lifesaver. But this is where you either accept it or die.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me.
In 1993, the kid from Nicetown made his final journey.
I still dream about my dad walking, and we have conversations about things. My father always had things that he wanted to do and wanted to see and wanted to take us along, and it was great because and fortunately he liked a lot of the things that kids like: model trains, tropical fish or deep sea fishing or, just kidding around. When I think of my father's legacy, I think of those 6 attributes. And that if players of today, whether they be on a baseball field or on a soundstage, can approach their work with creativity and receptivity, with perseverance and patience, and with humility and discipline, that they'll be carrying on the Campanella tradition.
You have to have that little boy in you to play.